Hi, Guts. If you don't know what the Gut system is, it's a mechanic that exists in some fighting games, Soul Calibur 6, Guilty Gear, where when your health gets lower, your opponent does more damage to you. And in Tekken 8, it exists. Kind of. Now, when you get to low health in Tekken 8 or in Tekken 7, obviously you go into rage. And when this happens, the damage that you're being dealt increases, but the normal damage to you doesn't decrease like a Gut system. Now, we can make some sort of weird philosophical argument about if your damage increases, then the opponent's health pool is technically lower because your moves have more value than their moves, and that's kind of the same thing as Guts. But that's not what this is about. What this is about is actually chip damage. So what I'm going to show here is with Elisa, because she's going to be the easiest example to show this with. If you do a bunch of moves in this game, for example, Elisa's 1+2, it does 6 chip damage, right? If I do a lot of heat engages, like up forward 2, it does 6 damage. If I go into heat, this number is further increased. 1+2 will do 9 damage, and up forward 2 will also do 9 damage. Whatever. Ignore me. But what happens when the opponent is in rage? This isn't something I've seen anyone really talk about, but it's very, very important. And what ends up happening is the chip damage is decreased by 75%. It's quite significant, especially if you're in heat, because if you're in heat, that 9 damage turned into 2. Now, there's some weird rounding stuff that's going on here. It rounds down or up, not one way or another. So sometimes it might go to 3, sometimes it might go to 2. It just depends on the move and the character and what's happening and the scaling percentages and all of that. But generally speaking, you're doing about 1/4 of the damage to your opponent if they are in heat. Obviously, when it comes to stuff like that does 1 damage already, like Elisa's DES, which is why I wanted to show this, it's not going to matter because you can't go below 1 damage. And this is a bad example actually, because she has a couple of attacks in DES that do 0 chip damage. But as you can see, this is not much different than when he's not in rage. In fact, I think it's doing 1 damage less overall. 1 chip damage less overall. So one weird quirk about this is that there are actually some things that do not get damage reduction when the opponent is in rage. One of them is if you're playing June, for example, anything that does self-damage to you as chip damage will not get reduced. Another thing is heat dash. So let me demonstrate this first. So as you can see, this again does 6 damage. If I am in heat, it does 9 damage. And if I heat dash after this, it does 19. So whenever you do a heat dash in Tekken 8, your chip damage is increased by a flat 10. And when the opponent is enraged, this flat 10 damage is not decreased. So the scaling is not based on the chip damage from dash, it's only the chip damage from the move. So again, we're doing 2 damage here, and now if I heat dash, I'm doing 12. So you will still take a decent chunk of chip damage from a heat dash, but you're not going to take nearly as much as you would if you weren't in heat. That, for example, is doing a fairly significant 19 on block. The question you might be asking yourself is, well, first, why don't they tell us this in the game? Because again, no one's been talking about this, so I feel like not a lot of people know about this, and the answer is, I don't know. But then the other question is, okay, Seth, well, why would I have to think about this in a practical game setting? Why is this important to know? And here's a situation for you. If I'm playing Kuma here, which is just an easy one to do, this move does a significant chunk of chip damage, but when he goes into rage, it does basically 1 damage. Now, the thing to keep in mind here with this situation is the amount of recoverable health that you have as Kazuya. So if you're taking all of this chip damage, you have a ton of chip damage that's been taking you fall into rage range, and you hit a heat engager. Look how much of your recoverable health comes back, right? You are far above the threshold for rage. Yet, after this happens, you're still taking about 1 damage in chip. So if you're holding out your heat engager because you're playing against a character that does heavy chip damage like Bears or Lisa, when you get into that rage threshold, you hold out your heat engager until then, assuming your character has good, reliable heat engagers that you can pull out at a moment's notice, then you can gain a significant advantage over your opponent. Because now, not only like if I'm a Bear, for example, assuming we don't have the rest of the recoverable health and you can't delete it, I can no longer apply my main gimmick of chip damage, right? Because now that you're in rage, I've just basically lost access to that. And with how much health that you have, and with that being my main gimmick, it's going to make it harder for me to be able to lower your health. On top of the fact, obviously, that you have increased damage. Now, let's take another example. If you're playing a character that can drain their own health, for example, Jun or Yoshimitsu or Zafina, you can actually use this to your advantage. Look how much recoverable health I have here. If I'm again playing against a character as chip damage and I can lower my own health into rage, then doing this now means that I have actively chosen to take a little bit of damage, but now my opponent again can't do any chip damage to me. This is invaluable when you're playing against a character that relies on being able to do chip damage. Or maybe not even relies, but just can do a lot of chip damage, because now you have actively not allowed them to be able to utilize their main gimmick. And it gives you a lot of control of the round. Again, especially if you're playing Jun and you go into heat, because now we've again recovered health, and that's just using the heat smash. That's not even using a heat engage, which I can't be bothered to because of just the weird setup and versus. But these are some ways that you can take advantage of this system depending on the character that you're playing. And of course, this is also important for you to know when you're playing against someone who is in rage. And of course, it's also important for you to know this if you're on the other end, or even if you're not in those specific situations where you're playing a character that can put themselves into rage, or you're playing against a character with chip damage, because every character in this game does chip damage. Every character has chip damage enhanced while they are in heat. Just take Yoshimitsu, for example, here. If I go into heat and I do something like this, that's doing a significant chunk of chip damage. Even something like that's doing chip damage, this is doing chip damage, right? It's a good chunk. But as we've demonstrated, if the opponent is in rage, all of a sudden, that stuff is cut off. So here we are, Kazuya's in rage again, right? Go in the heat here, do this, not doing a lot of chip damage. This didn't do a lot of chip damage. And remember before how that sequence pretty much got rid of all of the health that Kazuya has right now. But the simple fact that he's in rage means that all of this stuff that I'm doing while in heat is kind of going to waste, which means I have to utilize my heat in a different way. I have to use it to open up the opponent to fish for heat dashes, for combos. Of course, it went away. But to fish for heat dashes for combos, instead of just throwing out, say, for plus on block mids and highs, and still seeing it as a win, even if they block it, because, oh, I'm doing damage to them, because that's not really happening anymore. So Leroy obviously got some big buffs, so I want to make a demonstration out of Leroy. So one big thing that Leroy got changed was how his chain punches work. You can, when you're in heat with Leroy now, you can throw out chain punches more because they recover heat and they're safer on block. So you throw them out and they do a good chunk of chip damage. For example, if we just do this, that's a lot of chip damage. That's a lot of chip damage, right? So if I was to do a sequence with Leroy here, and forgive me because I don't know how to play Leroy. Yeah, a lot of damage, right? It was like 25% just on block. It's insane. But let's compare that to when not the player is in rage, but the opponent is in rage. I'm not holding back. Significantly less damage, right? And so what this means for Leroy, and this is an extreme example, and there aren't a lot of characters like this, but even if you're not playing a chip damage character, what you should keep in mind when you're in this sort of situation is that your moves on block aren't really doing much. If the opponent isn't enraged, then yeah, they're doing a lot. We're essentially doing, with Leroy here, combo damage on block, which is absurd, and that might be worthy of its own video and its own discussion. But when we're looking at the game as it is right now, not trying to critique it, not trying to challenge any of the gameplay decisions, and just saying, this is how it is. When you go in the heat and the opponent is enraged, when you go in the heat, a lot of the time, you can make the opponent block a bunch of moves, and even if you end up not getting any real damage out of it, it's still a win, because that chip damage will probably convert into real damage at some point. If they don't recover it, then it essentially is real damage on block. And if you can get a combo off of it, then hey, that's a big bonus, right? But now what's happening is if you go in the heat and you do a sequence like that, and that's all you get out of it, that's not really much, especially for all of your heat. And then consider from the opponent now, if we're in a similar situation. Look, I'm just going to have him do forward 2 twice, and just doing that, the opponent now who's in rage has done about the same amount of damage I block as I did with heat, and he still has half left, and he went into it manually. So there's a lot that he can still fish for. He doesn't have forward 2 in the heat dash. The forward 2 hits. However you actually do chip damage with Kaze, because I don't know. You can see the value in that, and you can see the value you get if you're holding your heat until you get into rage. So these are things that you have to keep in mind. So what do you do then when you're the player that's not in rage, your opponent is in rage, and you have to use heat? And well, the answer is don't throw things out. What you're doing is, instead of relentless aggression, instead your goal is to play neutral and fish for a heat dash. And if you end up getting to the end of your heat consumption and you end up only being able to do a heat dash, I mean, it doesn't really matter, because again, this is about the same amount of damage as we were doing with that whole sequence that did 25-30% or whatever it was with just the heat dash. So if you're in heat here and you're just la-di-da-di-da, my heat's draining, but I don't care because it doesn't really matter, and you can't find an opening for your heat dash, right? Then just put it out at the end. That's what you're looking for. And of course, this extends also to heat smash if you can get a heat smash, because it's going to put you in a combo situation or in the mix-up situation. It's just not necessarily going to give you a full combo. That's the big difference. You can choose between the two. It's going to vary a lot on depending on the situation, the character you're playing against, etc., etc. But that's how you have to change your thinking in these situations. You change it from unrelenting aggression, pressure, and because you get the chip damage, and if you get the launcher, that's a huge bonus. Of course, you want the launcher if you can get it, but you're mainly looking at whatever gimmicks you can do, whatever helps your character, and that, to playing defensively, playing neutral, and waiting for that opening to be able to get that combo that will kill them. And of course, you could also just heat smash, put them in a mix-up situation, kill them. It depends on the health, but that's the basics of how I think that you should approach this whole weird situation. Anyway, that's it. Hope this helped you. Bye-bye.